viewers, the AIIB ill-fated London-bound aircraft was carrying 240 passengers and crew members. It crashed within 32 seconds after takeoff. It killed all but one on board and several at the BJ Medical College where it crashed into. A month since the crash, initial findings of the AAIB, or the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, which is probing what really led to the horrific crash, has come out. And as per the initial report, there's a devastating chain of events that unfolded within seconds after the takeoff. Both engines unexpectedly shut down during the initial ascent, resulting in a sudden loss of thrust and a rapid descent, and finally that crash. And all of that happened in just 32 seconds. Now, in the next 1 hour, we will take you through what exactly does the report say, and more importantly, the questions that remain unanswered and the implications of this report. First and foremost, the biggest takeaway of the report has been that the fuel was cut off to the two engines within seconds, and then the chain reaction follows. Now I'm going to walk you through the questions that remain unanswered from this report and where focus is likely to be for us to really get to know at the bottom of this entire investigation as to what really happened. Let's put that out. The 9 unanswered questions that remain from this report. First and foremost, who pushed that switch to cut-off position? The first and the biggest takeaway has been that the fuel was cut off. Who actually pushed that button? That's the first and most important question. Second, was the switch deliberately pushed to cut off? We do not know. It is a question that we are asking, not jumping to any conclusions like any of the foreign media outlets. It's a question we are asking. Then why the 25-second delay in reactivating the switches? There was this delay when the pilots were speaking to each other, then the switches were reactivated. All of that took those precious seconds, and every second counts. And we are asking, why that delay? Next, was there a system malfunction? What really happened here? Boeing 787 is one of the most sophisticated aircrafts in the world. Was there a system failure, a system malfunction that happened? Again, a question that hasn't been answered so far. Next, can data prove how switches moved? At the end of the day, how it happened, who did it, both the pilots, the brief exchange that they said, both of them said they didn't do it. The first one asked the other one, he said, no, I haven't done it. Who did it? More importantly, can we prove that and know about that through data? Because that's the only way, A, we get to the bottom of this, and more importantly, ensure that this never happens again. That's the other aspect of this probe. Ensure that this never happens ever again. Why was the 2018 Boeing advisory on checks optional? Now, this is very important, viewers. Boeing had said that there are times when that switches malfunction, and it was given as an optional advisory, not mandatory. Why was it not mandatory? If that had been mandatory, things would have probably been very different right now. It's a question. Next, the 7th question, why timestamps don't match RAT deployment? Again, this is something that many aviation experts have been wanting to know, that in those 32 seconds, as you decode second by second what happens, the timestamps don't match. What data we need and are awaiting to be able to collaborate what happened? The 8th question, can missing timestamps actually fill the gaps as to what really happened? Another very important question, and the last and equally important, which is that is human factors a probe angle? So far, what we know is that the two pilots said that they did not turn off the engine switches in terms of the fuel to the engine. Both of them were well rested, fit. They had 18,000 hours of flying time under them. They were both flying wide-body aircrafts for some time. Could there still have been a possible human factor? We do not know. That's a question that remains unanswered. Let's now get in our guests joining us this evening to know more about this. We have with us an eminent panel from Frankfurt in Germany. We have Mr. Richard Godfrey. He's a founding member of the MH370 Group International. He's also an aviation expert who joins us, and he'll probably help us understand some of those unanswered questions. He's also operated Boeing 747. We have Dr. Sanat Kaul, former Joint Secretary at the Ministry of Civil Aviation. He's represented India in several of these Council of International Civil Aviation Organizations, an important international body. And we have Captain M.R. Wadia to talk about what is it that the Pilots Association was saying. Remember, viewers, they were saying that why is it that suddenly blame is being put on them? The human factor, the last question I asked, Many are already jumping to conclusions, and Mr. Wadia is going to help us understand why is it so important to not jump to any conclusions. Let me start with you, Mr. Godfrey, in terms of some of the unanswered questions that remain. Your thoughts on someone who understands the aviation sector very well, has flown the Boeings. You tell us, sir, how things stand right now. What do you make of this report?
I think the key issues that have been raised in the report are the cockpit voice recording, which is reported. We're not actually given the transcript. We are given what the report tells us the pilot said to the other pilot. I find it a bit strange that they don't actually state whether it was the captain or the first officer. We know, for example, the first officer was the pilot flying, and we know the captain was the pilot monitoring, and they have microphones in the cockpit, and they can tell which person is speaking at which time. The second thing we hear in the report of importance is that the airworthiness directives were all complied with, and on the aircraft and on the engine. And the third thing we read is at this stage of the investigation, it's just the preliminary stage, there are no recommended actions either on the Boeing 787-8 or the General Electric GE NX engines. So neither operators like Air India nor manufacturers like Boeing and General Electric need to be immediately concerned. I find that also a little strange because I don't think you can come to any conclusions from the preliminary report, and all the options are open.
Mm-hmm. That's a fair assessment. Let's get in Dr. Kaul on this. Dr. Kaul, we've put out some of those unanswered questions that remain, that hopefully we'll get answers to in due course of time. Your thoughts on this, and also mention what Mr. Godfrey just said in terms of what he finds unusual in these findings.
Yeah, so I also quite agree with him. We have now discounted the earlier things that, it could have been the chair of the pilot or which slipped, or, there was contamination in the fuel and other things. Now we are coming down to a specific thing, that the fuel switches, the two switches were turned off. And who did this? How did it happen? So the pilot and the co-pilot have spoken to each other. We don't know who spoke to the other. The names are not coming out, as Mr. Godfrey has said. And one asked the other, have you switched it off? And the other replied, no, I have not switched it off, the switch. So we are now into the dilemma that, then what happened? Then he has also referred to the 2018 December.
Yeah.
FAA has issued a special airworthiness bulletin. Bulletin number is AIIB-18-33, and where it talks about the concept of the danger, and this actually refers to 737, Boeing 737, and not to the Boeing Dreamliner 787. But I'm told that the cockpits are identical and the switches are identical, so it'll apply there also. And they said that this could be, there can be a defect in the switches, and unintentionally is the word used, they can move. Now this is a bit of a dilemma that, did this or could this have happened? So these are some unanswered questions where I think we need greater clarity. The other thing is that the digital recorder, not the voice recorder, is there. Digital recorder has not been really mentioned much. Mm-hmm. Now that should give some indication of the switch being turned off or on. I mean, is there a click in it? I don't know. I'm not a pilot, so I can't say.
Indeed.
Yeah, but there should be some system by which the digital recorder would get to know when, at what time the switch was turned off. So these are some of the issues which I have in mind, which I'm trying to raise. Maybe others can help in finding a solution too.
Captain Wadia? Captain Wadia, let me bring you in. A statement that came in from the Federation of Indian Pilots and several other bodies, which said that do not jump to any conclusions. It's very important because the two dead pilots are not here to defend themselves. Their integrity, their credibility has been put online by several irresponsible media outlets and sensational headlines. What will you say and how will you respond to them?
That's absolutely correct and true. But before I go, I can answer almost all the unanswered questions that you have put forward as to exactly what happened about the switches, etc., etc. But before I go into that, please remember that there are a lot of foreign pilots from abroad who've been giving TV interviews and jumping to conclusions that we know for a fact that this is exactly what happened. In fact, one of the things that Dr. Kaul referred to, as the seat went back and the pilot pulled the throttles back, some people have even mentioned that the pilots were not totally aware and they put the switches off, which is totally incorrect. Some foreign pilots have even quoted DGCA, CAR number so-and-so, dated so-and-so, and therefore we know this is exactly what happened and the pilot did this wrong and the flap was raised instead of the gear, etc., etc. Now, all those things, why would it come out from foreign agencies? Someone is definitely trying to mislead investigation, mislead the public as to what exactly happened. Now let me go step by step and to clarifying any doubt that you may have. First of all, the aircraft was fully serviceable before it took off. Everything was absolutely in place. All the checks were done properly and the configuration of the aircraft, everything was perfectly okay. There was no problem at all. However, the problem starts only after the aircraft has started to roll and is about to take off. When the aircraft is taking off, it has achieved a speed of 118 knots, which is not too bad. But what we all know now for a fact that both engines have failed. Now, the first question that everyone would like to know is why have they failed? Did the pilots put the switches off? Let me clarify this issue that you have been referring to, these switches.
Yeah.
First of all, these switches on the aircraft are not like your household switches where you put on the fan and the fan comes on, you put on the light and the light comes on.
Right.
These are fail-safe switches which have guards. They have different airline. Boeing has different procedures. Airbus has different procedures. But they are all fail-safe switches which have double safety issues that you just cannot cut them out by mistake.
Okay, that's...
Secondly,
hold your thought there, sir. Hold your thought. Let me get in some of the other panelists as well. I come back to you of the remaining points you mentioned. Mr. Godfrey, I want to bring you in on the 2 points that some of the other panelists made, which is about interests at stake. And there are very high stakes here. As someone who's studied some of the other aviation tragedies that have taken place, you respond to what what Captain Wadia said here about stakes being high, about interests being there as far as this report is concerned. He mentioned that there's an effort to even mislead the report from here on. Do you agree with that?
I think I'd like to clarify, firstly, a couple of things. It's quite correct that these fuel switches are protected and they have a safety mechanism that you have to lift or pull them, and then you can move them to the other position. They would have been in the run position, and then if you want to go to the cutoff position, you have to lift it, and then you can move it. It has in it a spring which you have to pull against to lift. And if that spring is broken, which is what the bulletin was about, then you need, it says in the bulletin, change it and repair it at the next opportunity. And I cannot understand why it says at the next opportunity, which means, the next flight, before the next flight you repair it. But then it also says in the headline, this is not a mandatory requirement. And that is a little bit, maybe I'm being semantic here, but I think that's a conflict of information going on. So that's one point. The other is that we have CCTV footage of most of the rollout, along the runway, and the takeoff, the initial climb, and the descent to the crash. And you can look at that CCTV footage. It's about 1,700 frames of video. And I've aligned that with the timing that's been released in the report. And we also have ADS-B data, and you can align it with the timing of the ADS-B data. And I think the report is accurate, but it is not complete. So, for example, the report lays out the timing from when they were cleared for takeoff, when they reached V1, when they reached VR, the rotation speed, when the aircraft moved into the air mode and transition. It does not talk about at what point an engine failed and whether it was a single engine or both engines. In the CCTV footage, I see evidence that the right engine failed just on the same time as the transition to air mode, so at the rotation point.
Okay.
And I see the left engine failing only 4 seconds later, when the aircraft is airborne. So why doesn't the report mention engine failure?
Yeah, and let's put that out to the other two panelists, Dr. Kaul as well as Captain Wadia. Mr. Kaul, you go first, sir.
Well, it's very difficult to say why they have not done this, as Mr. Godfrey has pointed out. The timings are important and they are technical. So did both the engines fail simultaneously, or they failed one? Because even on one engine, and I'm subject to correction, I think the aircraft can perhaps take off, and there's enough thrust to go up.
Yes.
So from what I can make out, that both engines, in a way, simultaneously or within seconds of each other, failed, and therefore there was no thrust left. This is subject to confirmation by Mr. Godfrey and
Captain Wadia, yes.
yes.
Okay, so I want to now come to the other aspect which many have focused on, which is that cockpit conversation. Few seconds, but Captain Wadia, there's been a lot of focus on that. And do you think that really holds the key to finding out what happened when one pilot, we don't know which one of them asked the other, did you cut off the fuel supply? And he said no. How important is this cockpit conversation to knowing what really happened?
It is very important in the right context. And that's why I'd like to clarify the whole thing. Let me finish up about this conversation also, and about the switches also at the same time, which won't take too much time. First of all, as the aircraft has rotated, both engines have cut off. That means fuel has been starved from the engine, and both engines have failed. Now, why it has failed is a matter for eventual analysis and debate. But therefore, I'm not going to touch on why it failed. But the fact is that it did fail. And what you're talking of, the conversation on board the aircraft, it is a perfectly normal thing to do. Two pilots are there in the cockpit. Both are aware of what's happening. And they have taken off the aircraft. And at that moment, if an engine fails and there's loss of thrust on the engines, obviously someone will ask the other, did you do anything? Did you put the switches off? Perfectly normal question, nothing unusual about it.
Yes.
So the other person has said, no, I have not switched it off. Nothing has happened. Now, please understand that the switches cannot happen on their own. As we've clarified earlier, they are fail-safe switches. Also, these switches are not directly connected by a cable or something to the fuel corporation, etc., fuel valves. These switches give indications to an elaborate system, which is an electrical system which connects and gives fuel to the engines. Now, therefore, if something has failed in between, the electrical system or the system where the fuel is injected into the engines, that is to be determined.
Okay.
At this point in time, therefore, one second, let me finish off this point. Therefore, the fact is that the engines have failed first. Now, why it has failed is to be determined. We do not have further clarification on that at all. But
Okay.
the report which has given you all the facts, you can correlate that report. Nowhere does it say that the switches were switched off by the pilots.
Yes.
Now, did the pilots touch the switches? I would say yes, because that's a perfectly normal thing to do. If both engines have failed, one of the methods, and that's the memory item for the pilots who've been taught and have been trained and done the simulator, what they have to do, and this is exactly what they did, is switched off the fuel lever and switched on again in a matter of a second or so. So they did that to both the engines. And the report also claims that when they did this, there was initial ignition, there was initial fuel ingestion in the engine.
Yes.
And one of the engines, engine number one, did pick up slightly. But because
Yes.
there was hardly any time, the aircraft was very low, it didn't have time to pick up. So was there a malfunction in this, or was it tampered with? I would not rule out any possibility. Therefore, we do not know. Let the investigators
Absolutely,
do
sir.
their job. Is it possible that could be tampered with, and is it possible that could be sabotaged?
We do not know.
There
We do
have
not
been
know
cases.
those
We
questions.
do not know. Correct.
Absolutely,
we
sir.
We do not know.
Absolutely,
So we will not
sir.
refer-
And we at NDTV have been very clear. No speculation, no unnecessary inferences, only sticking to facts, because at the end of the day, this is what responsible journalism is all about, putting the facts out for our viewers, even as we mention again that there are unanswered questions. I'm afraid I have to leave it there. Thank you so much, gentlemen.